Hey guys, so today I'm going to show you a bit of the basics of how to draw in AutoCAD. We're going to go over layers, the drawing tools, the modification tools, and making sure our snapping settings are correctly set. So before we start drawing, we'll check out what units we're in, typing in units and hitting enter. We want this set to millimeters and OK. Next we'll look at our snapping settings. So if we go to the bottom right toolbar down here, we'll see a whole bunch of settings. So if we look at the one that looks like a square, click on the arrow drop down, you'll see a whole list of different snapping settings. So generally I like to have the endpoints, midpoints, center, geometric center, intersections, extensions, insertion, perpendicular and nearest set on. But obviously it depends on what you're drawing. But for the types of drawing we are doing in the detailed template, I think these should be pretty good for us. We can also have the snapping reference lines set to on so we can see the lines that we're snapping on. And we can either have orthogonal restrictions or restrict specified angles. So in the drop down you've got a whole bunch of those to pick from as well. So I like to have this set on 30, 60, 90, 120, etc. I'll show you the difference between the two once we get started in drawing. So in the detailed template, let's open up the layer properties and we'll notice this does 0.5, 0.25 and 0.35 again like we saw in the plot style video. The does existing layer, the hatch layer and the text layer. So for all our basic drawings of the details, we'll just start off drawing everything on the red layer. We can always change what layer items are on later after we're finished drawing. So double clicking to turn this layer on. So let's start off by drawing a simple line. Clicking on the Home tab, clicking on the Line button. We can specify our first point anywhere, and then we can either type in a distance or we can drag the cursor down to however long we think we need. But for our details, we should be typing the value in to be accurate. So let's say we want a 500mm long line, so half a meter. Firstly, we're going to specify the angle that we want this length to be at. So if we wanted it to be straight across, so horizontal, we'd make sure it is snapping to 0 degrees. If we wanted it at 30 degrees or at a certain degree, we could also type that in after. So for now, I'm just going to do one that is straight down, so 90 degrees from the horizontal, and I'll just make sure it's snapped to that 90 degrees and type in 500 and click enter. And hitting escape. Now I have a 500mm long line and we can double check that using the properties. So type in properties or prop and enter. We can see that the length of this line is 500. So 500mm. So if we wanted a line that didn't follow these angles in the polar tracking, we could simply draw a new line, click on the starting point, leave your mouse, type in the length, hit tab, and then say I wanted it to be precisely 85 degrees, and then hit enter and escape. So now we have a 500mm long line set at 80 degrees from the horizontal. So let's try using another one of the drawing tools. So if we use the Polyline, this will create a series of lines one after the other, and once we're finished drawing those lines, it will be one shape, so not a series of individual lines. So if we say draw a random shape with a few lines, if we wanted to close this, we could type close, and that would end it where we started. So now we've got a random shape that's used a series of lines, but they aren't individual lines, they are all stuck together. If we did the same thing with the line tool and typing in close, it would end up a series of individual lines that aren't connected. But we can quickly change that by highlighting them all and writing join. So now it ends up similar to the Polyline. It's one shape and all the lines are connected. If we want to add in a circle, there are multiple different ways of adding in the circle. So we can either start with a point at the top and the bottom, doing 3 points, or the one that I mainly use is the center and radius. So if we click on this option and start drawing a circle, we'll click. This is where the center of the circle will show up. We can either type in a radius or pick one. So let's say our radius is 100 and enter. So now we have a circle with a radius of 100. If we want to add in an arc, my favorite one is the 3-point, but obviously you can play with all these other different options of creating arcs. So you specify the starting point, the middle point, and the end point. So this could be good for following along paths where you don't know the radius and you're drawing off of an image and tracing that. So another great tool is the rectangle tool. This way you're able to draw rectangles or squares without having to use multiple lines like the Polyline and the line tool. So if we hit rectangle, specify the first corner and bottom right, we can type in their dimensions, or if we're tracing over an image, just clicking on the spot where you want it to end. So I'm just going to say 500 by 250 and enter. So changing between the dimensions is a simple tab press on the keyboard. So now we have a 500 by 250 millimeter rectangle. If, for example, we were drawing the reinforcement inside and they had curved edges to suit the rectangle, we could hit on rectangle and press F and enter. We're now able to specify a fillet radius for the rectangles. So this is the radius of the corners that are produced. So let's say we wanted a 20 millimeter radius fillet. Type in 20 and enter. And now we can create a rectangle that has filleted edges. So we could be putting that inside of this rectangle. Say if this was the concrete and this was the reinforcement to go inside, we could simply do this. If you have already drawn your rectangle, we can use the modification tool Fillet. So clicking on the drop down here, choosing Fillet. We'll type in the letter R for radius, specify the same radius that we had before, so 20, and enter. And then we're just clicking on one side of the rectangle and another, and this will create a fillet. If we want to repeat the same action more than once, so say if we're drawing a rectangle, a line, or doing the fillet modification tool, all we have to do is click enter, and it's got the same settings, so the same radius, and we're using the fillet tool. So all we have to do is click enter and select our objects again. Simple as that. So if we want to do it for all corners, hitting enter again, choosing our sides, enter again, and the last side. And now we have a filleted rectangle. If we want an oval, then that's simply this tool here, specifying the center, the edge point, and now we can just specify the height of the oval. So now I'll quickly run through some of the modification tools. We just looked at the fillet tool before with the rectangle. So that's a great tool for edges or paths that turn and where you want corners added in after you've done your lines. Another great one is obviously the move tool. So if we click on move, select an object, hit enter. We can also select multiple objects at once. We'll specify the base point. So clicking on a corner, we can move that wherever we like. So let's say we wanted to attach it to this rectangle. Because I've got the snapping tools on, it's selecting the nearest object. So it'll now snap to this line that is already created on the rectangle. So now you can see there is no gaps. It is correctly aligned and the lines are exactly on top of each other. Another great tool is a copy tool. So if we wanted multiple of the same objects that we created, we click the copy, select the object. So say if we wanted to make duplicates of this line, click on the line, enter, specify the base point. So I'm going to click the bottom of this line. And then we can specify the distance apart that we want them, making sure we've already specified the angle with our cursor. So dragging it around to where you want it. Say if you wanted it completely horizontal, typing in 20 and enter. So now we've just created a line that is perfectly parallel with this one, just 20 millimeters to the left. Another cool one is the rotate. So if you've drawn an object but it isn't correctly aligned with something, we can simply click on the rotate tool, click on the object, enter, specify that base point again, So let's say we wanted the midpoint of this line, so you can see the triangle come up, and if you hover long enough, it'll show the midpoint. Clicking on that, and now we can drag it around to the angle that we would like. So let's say we want it completely vertical, and just clicking again. So now we've just rotated this object. If we wanted the same object twice, but in the opposite direction, such as this crazy shape here, we could just move this out of the way, specify its base point up a bit, and now we can use the mirror tool, selecting the object that we want. Kind of looks like a boot. Then you want to specify the first point of the mirror. So we can specify maybe this base point, and using our polar tracking, clicking on the perfectly vertical line. If we wanted to flip an object and get rid of the first one that we drew because it was the wrong way, we can click yes. But if we want the same shape twice, but on facing both directions, we'll click no. So now we've got two of the objects, but facing different directions. We've also got the scale tool. So if we hit scale and say we were looking at this line here, clicking the object, hitting enter, specifying the base point. So I'm going to specify this very bottom point. Say if we wanted it 2 times longer, we could type in 2 and enter. So now we've got a line that is 1000 millimeters long instead of our initial 500 millimeters. We've also got the trim tool. So if we wanted to get rid of this line between these two different shapes, but keep every single other line that connects the two, we'll click on the trim tool, hit enter, and now we can simply get rid of this line in between. Clicking twice because there was 2 lines overlapping. So now if we want to make sure this line and this line act as one object, we can highlight them both and type join and enter. So now it is one continuous shape. And last but not least, one of my favorite tools, the offset tool. So say if we were drawing a path, I might use the Polyline, trace around the edge of the properties. I'm just going to draw a random line. We might add some fillets in that. So we've still got the 20 millimeter fillet that we had from before. Pressing enter to do it again a couple more times. That'll do. And hitting escape. And now if we use the offset tool, we can specify our offset distance. So if we wanted this path to be 100 millimeters wide, we'd type in 100, enter, select the object that we wanted to offset. So in this case, it's our path. So we can either drag up or down. So we can either offset inwards or outwards. So in this case, I might go up. And so now we've got a path shape created. So now we might want to close up these edges, and I'll show you how to fill this in with a hatch. So clicking enter again to use the same tool, so the line tool, and enter. Highlighting all these, and the line over here, typing in join, and enter. So now it's one big shape, and now we'll click on the hatch tool. So say it was going to be a concrete material, there's a whole bunch of lists. So it could be paving, could be sand, could be earth, could be grass. But for this one, I'm going to choose concrete. Clicking in the internal point that we want to put the hatch in. We can change the scale of the hatch here. So if we want the shapes inside to be bigger or smaller, we can type in 1 for bigger, or 0.1 for smaller. So I'm just going to leave it at 0.1 for now and close the hatch creation. So remembering in our layer properties, we wanted our hatches to be on this layer here. So if we want to change the layer that this hatch is on, clicking on the hatch, coming back to the home tab, clicking on the drop down and clicking on the hatch layer. So now this hatch is moved to the hatch layer. So if we escape and click on this, you'll see in the Home tab that hatch is still here, so we've successfully moved it to the hatch layer. If we wanted to shift this shape to the Des 0.5 layer, we'd simply do the same thing, clicking on the drop down and selecting the Des 0.5. So we might do this if it's an important object that we want to stand out when we print it. If we wanted to insert a break line, say if we're doing a cross section of concrete or something, we might have our two layers. Say if we had 1 meter by a 25mm thick layer of concrete. So now if we wanted to add another layer underneath, say PM20 soil, we would hover over the intersection. So this square with a little cross in it means intersection or endpoint. So we'll click here. That way it perfectly lines up along the vertical line. We'll come across and we want it to perfectly align with this side too. So we're going to hover over this bottom corner until we see the intersection or endpoint come up, the green square, and slowly drag down. You'll notice that if we stray away from this and come back, the line will appear again and show extension. So that means it knows kind of where you're wanting to draw and it will bring you back to this spot. We could also type in 1000 instead, as we know that was the length from before. And I'm just going to say 20 for the thickness and enter. So now you can see these lines are perfectly in line and this one is on top of the previous line that we created. So now obviously 1 meter is quite a long cross section. So say if we only wanted to show the inside as the whole thing's the same, we could click on Express Tools, the break line symbol, start a little bit above the drawing, straight down and going to a little bit below the drawing. Right in the middle, we want to specify where the break line symbol shows up. So we might put it just above this line, remembering that the top one was 25 and the bottom one was 20mm thick. So that's roughly in the middle. So now we can see that the break line symbol is pretty small. So if we wanted to increase the size, we'd click on the scale tool, clicking on the object, so the break line, enter. I'm going to specify right near this break line and say I wanted it 4 times as big. So I'm just going to type in 4 as my scale and enter. So now it's a decent sized break line. So now if we want to reduce the size of these lines, because they're a bit long now, we can click on the object, click on the endpoint, and just simply drag it down to where we want. Or we can specify a length. So obviously we're going to need 2 of these. So clicking on that object, copy, specifying the base point, and I'm going to do a cross section that is 250mm long instead of our 1000mm. So making sure the snapping line is perfectly horizontal, typing in 250 and enter and escape. So now we've got 2 break lines on our cross section. So now we can just delete these lines that we no longer need outside of these break lines, because this area in here is all we're going to show in our drawing. So if we hit on the trim tool, we can just click on the lines that we don't want. Remembering there's 2 lines in the middle from where they overlapped. Get rid of these ones on the outside and enter. So now we've got a cross section with break lines as it's too long for the drawing. So now we could go ahead and hatch these up and show the materials inside. So now I'm going to quickly show you how these drawings ended up looking in a layout space. So say we go to the 1 to 10 scale layout page. You'll see we've got all our shapes shown here. If we double click into the viewport, we can move around to find our drawing. Obviously this one ended up a bit smaller than what we would initially use it in the 1 to 10 scale. So we'll stick with these ones, double click out. And if we type in plot and enter, continue to plot a single sheet and preview, you can see that this all ended up black and white. The hatch is slightly grey colour. This line inside that we made green is thicker than the red lines, and you can also do that with the yellow line as well. So now you know how to use the layers and all the different drawing and modification tools in AutoCAD. You've also learned how to change objects from one layer to another, and you've also learned how to increase the size of shapes if you've drawn them the wrong size to begin with as well.